Hi, everyone. This is the Catholic CEO, Henry Kutarna. I'm joined today by my good longtime friend and colleague, Trudy Pelletier, who runs Trudy Pelletier Consulting. And I've known Trudy for quite a few years. Over the past few years, we've been talking a lot about principles, principle leadership, ethics, and topics related to how that affects us as human beings and us as business people. So I'm joined by Trudy today. She's going to, I think, help us understand quite a bit about ethics and how it ties to leadership. So I'm going to begin by asking Trudy to introduce herself and tell us what she does and some of her background and her credentials. Very interesting. You'll find this interesting. Trudy, welcome.
Thank you so much, Henry. It is always fun to hang out with you and have great conversations. It's one of my favorite things. I have branded myself as a communications specialist. And some of the credentials that I bring behind that is I'm a certified executive coach. I'm a mediator. I'm a family enterprise advisor. My main work is working with business families, family enterprise, who are in the process of succession and continuity planning. And I don't do anything technical. I only deal with communication, governance, the health of the relationships. I specialize in difficult conversations.
That's very interesting because in the Catholic CEO, I find myself doing the same thing. I'm finding myself in very difficult and challenging conversations because our whole thing is, can you be Catholic and successful in business? And of course, I say yes to that. And I know that I've been telling you about the Catholic CEO for probably over a year, maybe 2 years even, and you've given some good insights into it. So maybe I'll jump right in on our first question for you. Is it possible, Trudy, to run an ethical business, or is it possible to be an ethical business leader? Is this possible?
Well, in my world, absolutely. And I live in a world that communication gives access to anything is possible. It's a function of communication, and it's a function of understanding oneself, which is directly correlated to leadership. So while I don't, have all of the deep understanding of the Catholic religion as you do in your faith, I, like you, say, yes, it is possible. I also recognize that today there's a lot more external forces that stretch and press people that have them maybe rely more than ever on their faith, the Catholic principles, their principled leadership, their values, whatever it may be.
Well, this is interesting. I'm hearing in what you've said a bit of a dichotomy. So you can be you can run an ethical business, you can be an ethical leader, but you're under some pressure to mitigate or act against that. Well, in recent times in the Catholic world, and well, in our world, the current world that we see, we're being increasingly asked, Catholics are being increasingly asked to do things that might be inimical to their faith, against their faith. They might have to choose based on certain requirements that are being pushed through our society. They may have to choose between a set of ethical principles that are in accord with the Catholic faith and doing something that's against the faith. So there's a dichotomy here. And so how do you square that? How do you, if you're an ethical business leader, how do you deal with this pressure? What do you do to deal with the pressure that you spoke of and that I also can recognize in the Catholic faith?
Well, first and foremost is to acknowledge the pressure, because we actually can't transform anything. We can't deal with anything without acknowledgement and communication. So first and foremost, rather than turning our head away and in the sand and saying there's nothing to deal with, what there is to be in communication about the pressure. And I think more so than ever before, given the conditions of our world, our society, that yes, people are challenged by choosing. And it really comes back to, what are we rooted in? Now, there's a number of different pieces. For you, it may be just your Catholic faith. For me, there's spirituality, and then there's my values. And, every human being has values. Very few people spend time articulating their values and defining their values. Mine are really core and clear and defined. And that's part of the work that I do with individual leaders that I coach, as well as family businesses, because values then become what we create structure for either running our business or the succession plan or the continuity planning or our philanthropic initiatives, whatever it may be. So I don't think it's an either or. I think it's very much multidimensional aspects of ethics, principled leadership, values, faith that are at play. And there for sure is a demand on leaders to have their own inner authority based on their principles, based on their faith, to draw from that, as opposed to giving way to that external pressure.
Yeah, I like what you said there, Trudy, because, you know, in the belief of the Catholic CEO, we think that you can be Catholic and successful in business. You can marry those two, you can blend those two, but what it requires is you to have this structure that you speak about. I'm going to ask you about that in a second, but I want to first ask you, are ethics and principles the same thing? And I'm not asking a trick, it's not a trick question, but are ethics and principles, what's the lexicon? What are the words that we use to describe this? What are
well,
the terms?
So I don't think they're exactly the same thing. And in instances, they're so closely correlated, it can be hard to pull it apart, right? So like I have a strong work ethic as an example, and I actually rely and have relied on and have a reputation in my community, not just with those that I serve, in all the communities that I play in, of being reliable, to honor my word. So is that, so for me, that's where my personal values come in, equated with my work ethic, because I really believe, and so maybe this is one of my principles, that I don't ask people to do things that I wouldn't do myself.
Yeah, this is, again, it's ringing true with the talks that I have with people on, behaving according to Catholic principles. The virtue of honesty or truth, the search for truth, our word, our commitment, if we say we're going to be on time for something, then that's our word, and we should keep that promise. And so if we begin to think of our actions every day like that, then we're actually applying a set of principles. And that reminds me, then I want to ask you, what would be a set of principles that a business leader would demonstrate in your view of the world, or in this world that we live in today? What are some of these principles?
Well, I have a bias here, Henry, and my bias is communication can resolve anything. The problem is most people stop talking, and many leaders do not know how to cultivate a space for communication. Many people have been, I'm going to say, recognize the power of listening, yet very few of us listen to understand. Studies still today and 30 years ago say that 97% of the population listens to respond, meaning while you're talking, I'm thinking about what it is I'm going to say. That robs people of, being fully present in communication, being a space for communication. So for sure, one of the things that I think leaders are accountable for is to develop themselves to ongoingly be increasing their capacity for communication, their capacity to be present in emotional situations, highly charged. I mean, everywhere they're reporting today that we have higher levels of anxiety than ever before. And that's an emotional experience for people. And most leaders shy away from dealing with the emotional nature of, leadership.
Yeah.
And and therefore it diminishes their capacity to, be effective and to create powerful teams, accountable teams.
I want to come back to this anxiety thing in a minute, but I'm compelled to ask you the question. I'm chuckling a little bit because in the years I've run CEO peer groups, and even our St. Joseph Accelerator, which we run now, and we've done some work over the summer with various test groups to I guess refine the process. What we've discovered is this we listen to respond thing. It's a big deal, and I'm just, it's an anecdote, but it's really powerful, perhaps a habit to change with people, because I know that we've experienced that in our St. Joseph Accelerator group meetings. People will jump in with a point, and it's to get their point across when it's not necessarily related to where the conversation is at the moment, because it might have been 30 seconds or a minute ago. And so it's a thing that's that I've noticed lately, and I'm glad you raised it. But I do want to get back into the anxiety. Let's talk about that, because there's a lot of anxiety brought on by all kinds of different factors, which, we could get into great detail someday about those. But what is this anxiety thing, and what are the mechanisms that we use to cope with it? What do we do about that?
Well, this is so cool, because like one of the things that most people don't know is that anxiety triggers the human brain instinct, which actually impacts our ability to think clearly. Because when instincts are triggered, and it's triggered by a function of safety. So when there's any kind of threat, now there's emotional threat, there's mental threat, there's the threat of not belonging on a team that you work with, increases people's anxiety. The external stresses of the economic environment, right? The financial strain. So there's external forces and internal experiences that create anxiety. And we're actually limited in our thinking and behavior when our brain is triggered. So when a person, now I'm not talking about mental health anxiety, right? I'm talking about that experience of something being threatened right then and there. I was walking last week with my colleague, Kim, and she's on they've got a huge initiative within their company to be inclusive and to have diversity. And her boss said something on a team meeting about it was something technical, like that the younger generation would know in terms of technology. And that's what he said. Hey, and I'll call him George, you're the youngest one of the group. Maybe you know about this that you could share. And she said the sidebar conversation with him was, you can't say you're the youngest one. Someone could be offended. Well, if someone's offended, that's the kind of anxiety I'm talking about, which then triggers that instinct, limiting our ability to think clearly and then show up clearly. Certainly when instinct is triggered, we don't have capacity to listen to understand.
Yeah, this, someday we'll have a longer talk about this because it's very relevant. In the Catholic CEO, working with Catholics who are trying to live their faith as well as do successful business, there is a serenity and a tranquility that comes from, prayer, mental prayer, spiritual reflection, and things like that. And so that's, again, it's a topic for you and I to talk about at some point in the future. But it's interesting how this actually can be worked on and it can be solved. And people have, I guess, for decades and centuries looked for this kind of a solution. I want to go to just perhaps in our last few minutes here, a question about what are you finding in your business? What are your clients saying about this business of principles and ethics and leadership? Are they facing these issues? Are they concerned about them? What are they saying to you?
Yeah, I just earlier this week, I'm working with a family business who is federally regulated, which means vaccinations, as an example, is mandated or will be mandated, is being mandated. And there is some divide amongst the family business leaders on whether or not like personal convictions playing out and personal beliefs about health. So for sure, they're facing some very difficult decisions and challenges. And it's not just about the business, because if you're a federally regulated organization, then you must comply in order to thrive. And then what there is to deal with is the impact on the family dynamics and the family communication because of those different, convictions.
Yeah.
So that's definitely one. Another is, I think I've heard 3 times in the last couple of weeks how challenging decision-making is given a daily changing environment. And, that's economically and that's politically. And then it also has to do with the pandemic and the requirements. So, that's that when it comes to decision making and decisions, looking at the long-term implications. And in the arena that I work in, there's a business system, there's a family system, and there's an ownership system. So we're always looking at the implications for each of those systems on the decisions being made. For sure, their principles, their values, and their ethics, whether that be faith-based or something else, work ethic as an example, are absolutely being challenged. And that's why it's even more important to have that structure articulated, to have some of those conversations for what occurs like intangible results. And yet, when you have your principles and values articulated, you can create governance structures in your business, in your family to guide and help navigate and reduce some of the anxiety that is coming from external forces.
Yeah, this thing about structure, I'm really impressed with that concept, because that's what we're trying to do at the Catholic CEO. And I'll just drill down very slightly on one of the points you raised. If people have, for example, conscience and seek an exemption, or for medical reasons seek an exemption from a particular kind of mandate that's out there, that may require them to choose. You mentioned that the company that you're talking about is federally regulated, and then they have to comply, otherwise they'll be out of business, or their license will be suspended or whatever. Catholics are increasingly facing the same thing. They will be asked to choose between their conscience exemption, which is based on not just a simple idea, but a complex set of principles that inform their conscience. And then if the civil state or the company says to them, you have to do this, they will have to then choose. And that's a topic for another time. In fact, I want to have another talk with you about that at some point, because we both know that's a hot topic these days. And I know many people in my parish in the probably the last 3 months, 25 people are now out of work because they've made a choice. They've chosen to not compromise their Catholic principles, and the consequence for them is that they lost their jobs. And so we're going to create an initiative to help create a Catholic economy. That's a whole other story that we'll get to at some point.
Oh, I can't wait to hear about that.
That's an interesting one coming. So let's close with, I'll ask you a sort of an open-ended question. What are you doing in your business? What are you looking at? What are you, you've written a book, maybe you could tell us about that, and let's grift a little bit. Let's tell me what you want, where you want clients and people to come.
Well, first and foremost, because of what's happening in the world, more than ever, there is a demand and a need for difficult conversations. And so I have my hand up to support, whether it's an individual leader, whether it's a team, to, create context and space to have those difficult conversations that strengthen relationships, have love and affinity be present, have communication be the access to create and resolve anything under any circumstance. And, there's elements of knowing yourself, like having this sovereign inner authority, your feet grounded and rooted in who you are. So those 25 people that you mentioned are choosing their Catholic faith. One, Henry, I just hear that as the most courageous action that people can be taking, right? To have them, their faith honored in a way that, has integrity everywhere. Because when we begin to compromise that, I mean, I think that it impacts health, it impacts relationships, it impacts families way beyond what we're even present to today. So I'm acknowledging the courage that it takes, for you to create this Catholic CEO and in your parish be a leader for people to have, the Catholic faith honored.
Yeah, that's couldn't have been said better. And I'll just say one more quick thing. The people that I'm speaking about are basically the price they paid. The consequence is loss of income. And that's tragic in our society, because what do? They could be moments away. They could be a short time away from, being homeless or on the street. And so there are big consequences to these things. So this is good. We'll have to make sure that we speak again soon, because these topics are very valuable. I'd like to thank you for coming along with us today. And, we'll see you again, I hope, Trudy, at some point. So this is the Catholic.
I'll have a conversation with you anytime, Henry. Thank you for the invitation.
Great. All right, it's in the calendar. It's the Catholic CEO, Henry Kutarna. Thanks for joining us today.